The chandeliers sparkled like stars in the grand ballroom, casting golden light over crystal glasses and designer gowns. The Hale mansion had never looked more magnificent. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of love, 20 years of marriage between Adrian Hale, the billionaire real estate mogul, and his wife Victoria. Guests whispered about how perfect the couple seemed, how rare it was to see such longevity among the wealthy elite. Cameras flashed, waiters carried silver trays, and a string quartet filled the air with soft melodies. But beneath the glittering perfection, a storm was about to break. Victoria, dressed in a flowing white gown chosen to symbolize purity and devotion, carried a small, hopeful smile. She had spent days preparing this evening, believing perhaps that her husband would finally see her again, not just as the quiet woman who stood behind his empire, but as the wife who had given him her youth, her loyalty, and 2 remarkable sons. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream that tonight would heal the growing distance between them. Then came the sound of laughter. High-pitched, sharp, cutting through the music like a knife. Heads turned. Entering the ballroom on Adrian's arm was Serena Cross, his much younger mistress. Her crimson dress clung to her like a second skin, her lips curved in a triumphant smile. The room gasped. Some whispered in disbelief. Others quickly pulled out phones to capture the scandalous sight. Victoria's heart clenched. She had expected many things from Adrian, but not this. Not tonight. Not on the very night meant to honor their vows. She swallowed hard, fighting to keep her dignity as Serena strutted closer, eyes glittering with cruel amusement. It happened fast, too fast. A waiter brought a silver pot of coffee to the table where Adrian, Serena, and Victoria stood. With a flick of her hand, Serena snatched it, her movements deliberate. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a chilling smile, she tilted the pot forward. Hot, scalding coffee cascaded down onto Victoria's pristine gown. Steam rose as the liquid soaked the delicate fabric, searing her skin beneath. A collective gasp rippled across the room. Victoria staggered back, clutching at the burning fabric, her face contorted in shock and pain. Laughter followed. Serena's laughter. Adrian didn't move to help. Instead, he smirked, resting a protective hand on his mistress's waist, as if the attack had been nothing more than a cruel joke. Cameras flashed, guests whispered. Some covered their mouths, horrified, while others leaned closer to watch the spectacle unfold. Victoria's eyes brimmed with tears. Humiliation washed over her like a tidal wave, drowning out the pain of the burns. 20 years of sacrifice erased in a single public humiliation. She looked at her husband, silently begging for him to defend her, to remember who she was. But Adrian only tightened his grip on Serena's waist, his eyes cold, his silence more brutal than any words. And that was the moment when everyone believed Victoria would break, collapse, and surrender. That 2 shadows appeared at the edge of the ballroom. Her sons had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before the humiliation in the ballroom, before the world watched her dignity scalded away by a mistress's cruel hand, Victoria Hale had been the picture of devotion. To the public, she was the quiet, graceful wife of a billionaire. To her family, she was the anchor, the silent force that kept the Hale household steady through storms of ambition and wealth. But no one knew the price she had paid. Victoria had not been born into luxury. She grew up in a modest home in upstate New York, the daughter of a factory worker and a school teacher. Her parents had little, but they gave her everything that mattered: discipline, compassion, and an unshakable belief in family. She carried those lessons with her when she moved to the city, chasing dreams of becoming an art curator. That was when she met Adrian Hale. Adrian was magnetic, charming, ambitious, and burning with the hunger of a man determined to conquer the world. He wasn't rich then. He was just a young man with bold ideas and relentless drive. Victoria fell for him, not for his money, but for his fire. She believed in him when no one else did. She worked double shifts at a small gallery, helping pay his bills, while Adrian chased investors and made promises of a future that sounded like fairy tales. When Adrian finally struck gold in real estate, Victoria was by his side. She had been there when he signed his first contract, when he bought his first suit that wasn't second-hand, when he stood on the rooftop of a crumbling building and declared he would one day own the skyline. Every triumph of his was built on her sacrifices. Their wedding was modest by billionaire standards, but to Victoria it was perfect, a promise of forever. And when their twin sons, Ethan and Daniel, were born, she gave herself fully to motherhood. She put aside her dreams of art and travel, devoting herself to raising them with love, patience, and the values her own parents had instilled in her. But as Adrian's empire grew, so did the distance. He was no longer the man who had once held her hand while they walked home in the rain. He became a figure larger than life, swallowed by power, consumed by ambition. Business trips stretched into weeks, then months. Dinners turned into cold leftovers eaten alone. Victoria endured it all, convincing herself that this was the price of success. She told herself it was temporary, that one day he would slow down and remember the life they had built together. She clung to anniversaries, to holidays, to the brief flickers of tenderness that reminded her of the man she once knew. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, doubt gnawed at her. She smelled perfume on his suits that wasn't hers. She found lipstick stains on wine glasses that never left her cupboard. But every time she asked, Adrian dismissed her suspicions with a cold laugh. "You're imagining things, Victoria. Don't embarrass yourself." Her friends urged her to confront him, but she held back. She thought of her sons, of the family she wanted to protect. She swallowed her pain, believing her silence was strength. And now, 20 years later, her silence had become her prison. As the burning coffee soaked her dress, she realized she had wasted years on a man who no longer saw her as a partner, but as an inconvenience. Her heart broke, not just for herself, but for the two boys she had raised to believe in honor, in love, in respect. She thought she was alone. But at that moment, as her tears blurred the glittering ballroom, a voice cut through the humiliation. "Don't you dare touch my mother again." The entire room turned. Ethan, her eldest son, had spoken, and the fire in his eyes promised a reckoning. Adrian Hale had once been the kind of man women envied and men respected. Handsome, charismatic, a dreamer who turned his ambition into concrete skyscrapers and billion-dollar deals. In the early years, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed nothing was impossible. He used to hold Victoria's hand proudly, introduce her as the woman who believed in me when no one else did. For a long time, she had been his anchor, his muse, his partner in everything. But success can corrupt even the strongest of souls. As Adrian's wealth multiplied, so did his ego. He began to see life as a game, people as pawns, and loyalty as a weakness. Business dinners blurred into late-night parties. Work trips became escapes to exotic resorts. The man who once whispered dreams to Victoria in their tiny apartment now whispered lies to hide his betrayals. Adrian's charm never faded, it only sharpened into something dangerous. He knew how to command a room, how to make investors bend, how to make women feel like they were the only ones in the world. But behind that polished exterior was a man who treated marriage as a chain around his neck, a chain he wore only for appearances. When Serena Cross entered his life, Adrian didn't hesitate. She was young, beautiful, and hungry for power, the kind of hunger he once admired in himself. She reminded him of his early days, except she didn't demand sacrifice. Serena offered him something Victoria no longer could: the thrill of conquest. What Adrian didn't see or refused to see was that Serena wasn't with him out of love. She saw him as a stepping stone, a name to attach to hers, a golden ticket into the world of endless champagne and flashing cameras. She flaunted him openly, knowing every scandal made her more notorious. Adrian didn't care. The more people whispered, the more he felt alive. And if Victoria's dignity was the price, so be it. He convinced himself she would never leave. After all, hadn't she endured everything for 20 years? Hadn't she swallowed her suspicions, remained silent, and played the dutiful wife while he climbed higher? To Adrian, Victoria was like an antique vase, valuable once, but now collecting dust in the corner while he showcased his new prize. He had forgotten that behind her quiet grace was steel, the kind of steel that had carried him through his lean years. And so, when Serena poured scalding coffee on Victoria at their anniversary gala, Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't rush to her side or shield her from shame. Instead, he wrapped an arm around his mistress and smirked, as if mocking the very vows he had once sworn. His silence was deafening. His betrayal, complete. The guests saw it. The cameras caught it. For the first time, Adrian Hale's mask slipped, not as a titan of industry, but as a man too cowardly to defend his own wife. The murmurs around the ballroom grew louder. Reporters scribbled furiously. Board members exchanged wary glances. Investors who had always admired his power now questioned his judgment. Adrian didn't notice. He was too busy basking in Serena's victorious grin. He believed he had humiliated Victoria beyond repair. In his mind, the game was won. But Adrian had underestimated the one thing he could never control: blood. Because just as Serena adjusted her dress and Adrian raised his champagne glass in mock celebration, a voice thundered across the ballroom, cutting through the whispers like a blade. "Father," Daniel said, his tone sharp and cold, "your empire ends tonight." And in that moment, Adrian Hale realized he was no longer the most powerful man in the room. Serena Cross was not just another mistress hidden in the shadows. She was bold, calculating, and unapologetically cruel. In a world where women whispered in corners and hid their sins behind locked hotel doors, Serena flaunted hers in front of flashing cameras. She wasn't content with stolen moments. She wanted the spotlight, the power, and the satisfaction of knowing she had destroyed another woman's life. At 28, Serena was already infamous in certain circles of Manhattan's elite. She had once been a small-town girl, waitressing in a cafe, dreaming of escaping her dead-end life. But unlike other dreamers, Serena knew exactly what she wanted: wealth, influence, and a seat at the table of the powerful. She didn't intend to earn it. She intended to take it. She perfected herself like a weapon. Every detail of her appearance was meticulously calculated. The crimson dresses she wore were not just fabric. They were signals, warnings that she thrived on danger and chaos. Her laughter was sharp, like glass breaking, meant to draw attention. She spoke with confidence that bordered on arrogance, daring anyone to challenge her. When she met Adrian Hale at a charity gala, she recognized him instantly as her ticket out of obscurity. She played the game well, listening intently to his stories, stroking his ego, pretending to admire his vision. But beneath the coy smiles and fluttering lashes, Serena's mind was cold, strategic, already calculating how she could replace the wife he had grown bored of. She despised Victoria long before she ever met her. To Serena, Victoria represented everything she rejected: patience, loyalty, humility. Where Victoria sacrificed, Serena took. Where Victoria endured in silence, Serena shouted for attention. To Serena, Victoria wasn't a woman to pity. She was a stepping stone, an obstacle to crush on her way to the throne. That was why, on the night of the Hales' 20th anniversary, Serena did not hesitate. She saw her chance to humiliate Victoria in front of the city's elite, and she took it. The coffee wasn't an accident. It was a carefully staged performance. She wanted the cameras to capture Victoria's pain, her burns, her tears. She wanted the world to see Adrian choosing her, Serena, over the wife who had built his empire with him. And Adrian, foolish in his arrogance, let her. He didn't stop her hand. He didn't stop her cruelty. He became her shield, her enabler, her proof that she had already won. What Serena didn't realize was that her arrogance had gone too far. In her hunger for attention, she forgot the oldest rule of the powerful: the higher you rise, the harder you fall. She thought the gasps of the crowd were admiration. She mistook silence for submission. She believed Victoria was too broken, too weak, too humiliated to ever fight back. But Serena had overlooked the two men who mattered most: the sons Victoria had raised, the heirs to Adrian's empire. Ethan and Daniel were no longer children. They were men. Men who carried not just their mother's quiet strength, but also the fire of their father's ambition. And unlike Adrian, they knew where their loyalty belonged. As Serena adjusted her diamond necklace and smirked at the horrified guests, she failed to notice Ethan stepping closer, his jaw tight with fury. Daniel's eyes followed her every move, cold and calculating. The room buzzed with tension, and yet Serena basked in it, believing she owned the night. She leaned into Adrian, whispering loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "It's pathetic how she just stands there. No wonder he wanted me instead." That was the final spark. Because in the very next moment, Ethan raised his voice, his words echoing through the ballroom. "Serena Cross, you will answer for what you did tonight." The Hale Anniversary Gala was meant to be the crown jewel of the social season. Invitations had been embossed with gold leaf, hand-delivered by uniformed couriers. Only the city's most powerful names had received them. Politicians, business titans, celebrities, and members of the press eager for a headline. To be invited to the Hale Mansion that night was to be seen, to be validated as part of an untouchable circle. The ballroom itself was a spectacle. Towering crystal chandeliers shimmered above velvet-draped tables, their surfaces adorned with orchids imported from Singapore and candles that glowed like stars. A 10-piece string ensemble played soft classical notes, while waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres so delicate they seemed almost too perfect to eat. The air was heavy with perfume and ambition. Every corner of the room whispered with quiet schemes. Old rivals shook hands through gritted teeth, pretending civility. Investors sized up potential partners while photographers circled, capturing every calculated smile. And at the center of it all was Adrian Hale, hosting like a king, his mistress at his side as if she were royalty. His presence commanded attention, but not respect. People admired his wealth, envied his success, but many feared his arrogance. Tonight, they would see that arrogance brought to its knees. Victoria had entered the ballroom quietly earlier that evening, her gown a graceful cascade of white satin. Though her smile was faint, many noticed her. To them, she was the true queen of the night, the woman who had endured 20 years by Adrian's side. But whispers had already begun. Why did she look so pale? Why was Adrian nowhere near her? Some exchanged knowing glances, already suspecting the rumors of his affair were true. Then Serena arrived in a blaze of scarlet silk, her arm looped through Adrian's. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Gasps rippled across the room. Some guests raised their brows in scandalized delight, while others turned away, embarrassed for Victoria. But no one left. No one ever left when there was the promise of a public spectacle. As the evening wore on, champagne flutes clinked and laughter echoed, but an unspoken tension pulsed through the air. Guests hovered near the Hale table, pretending to admire the ice sculptures or the live jazz, but in truth, waiting for the inevitable collision between wife and mistress. Cameras captured every glance, every flicker of pain across Victoria's face, every smug smile from Serena. The journalists knew they were witnessing something bigger than gossip. This was a scandal about to explode, the kind that would dominate headlines for weeks. The kind that could topple reputations. Then the unthinkable happened. The coffee poured. The gasp spread like wildfire, and the room was no longer a ballroom but a stage where betrayal, cruelty, and humiliation were performed for an audience that would never forget. Silence hung heavy in the aftermath, broken only by Serena's cruel laughter and Adrian's cold smirk. Guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should intervene or stay silent. The orchestra faltered, strings screeching before falling quiet. Victoria stood trembling, her gown soaked, her skin burning, her dignity shattered under hundreds of watchful eyes. For a moment, it seemed the night would end there, with her defeat immortalized in the lenses of cameras. But the Hale sons had entered unnoticed, standing just beyond the glow of the chandeliers. They had watched long enough. Their mother's humiliation was the final line crossed. And as the murmurs spread, as Serena whispered her poison into Adrian's ear, the two young men stepped forward. The empire Adrian thought he ruled was about to collapse in front of everyone. The ballroom had fallen silent after the coffee incident, but silence never lasts long among the wealthy. It quickly turned into whispers, sharp, slicing, merciless. Words traveled faster than the music ever could. One corner of the room hissed, "Did you see that? On their 20th anniversary?" Another responded, "I heard about the mistress months ago. Now it's out in the open." Phones were lifted discreetly, flashes of screens reflecting in crystal glasses. Guests who moments ago had been congratulating Victoria now avoided her gaze. A woman in a sequined gown leaned toward her husband, murmuring, "She looks so pitiful." Standing there, drenched and shaking. The husband only shrugged, his eyes on Adrian, as if siding with the stronger one was the safer choice. Victoria could feel it, the heat of humiliation crawling over her skin, hotter than the coffee itself. Every whisper was a dagger. Every sideways glance was a wound. Her body trembled, not just from pain but from the crushing weight of being watched, judged, pitied. She clutched at the fabric of her ruined gown, wishing she could vanish, disappear into the polished marble floor. Serena, emboldened by the attention, leaned back against Adrian with a smile so smug it could cut glass. "Look at her," she said loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear, still standing there like a ghost who doesn't know she's already dead. Laughter, quiet, nervous, but present, rose from a group of younger guests. Serena's cruelty was contagious, spreading like fire through dry grass. Adrian didn't stop her. He didn't even glance at Victoria. His hand rested firmly on Serena's waist, a silent declaration that his allegiance lay with his mistress. His smirk told the crowd he had chosen, and he was unashamed. Victoria's chest ached as she searched for a friendly face, someone who might come to her side, shield her from the storm. But even those she had once called friends looked away. The wealthy do not comfort the fallen, they circle like vultures. In that moment, she realized she stood utterly alone in a room filled with hundreds. The orchestra began to play again, an awkward attempt to smooth over the tension, but it only made the whispers seem louder. Guests spoke in low voices, but their eyes never left her. Some pitied her, some mocked her, but none offered a hand. Tears blurred Victoria's vision. She remembered nights spent awake, waiting for Adrian to come home. She remembered how she had ignored the lipstick stains, the perfume, the late calls. She had endured it all for the sake of family, for the sake of appearances. And now, here she was, destroyed not in the privacy of her home, but in the most public way possible. Her legs felt weak. She thought for a moment she might collapse, crumple onto the ballroom floor, and let them all see her broken. Her breathing grew shallow, her pulse racing. She heard Serena laugh again, a cruel, ringing sound that filled her ears like a siren. And just when Victoria thought she could endure no more, a new sound cut through the ballroom, strong, clear, and filled with a fury that silenced every whisper. Enough. The word echoed, reverberating against the marble walls. Heads turned in unison toward the source. Two young men, tall and commanding, had stepped out of the shadows at the edge of the room. Their presence shifted the air, their resemblance to Adrian undeniable, but their eyes, cold and blazing with anger, belonged entirely to Victoria. Her sons had spoken, and the whispers died in their wake. The scene replayed in slow motion inside Victoria's mind. The hiss of the coffee pot as Serena tilted it, the scalding liquid cascading down her white gown, the sharp burn against her skin. And then, worse than the physical pain, the laughter. Laughter that didn't belong to strangers, but to her husband and his mistress, the two people who should have been her destruction only in nightmares, not reality. Her breath caught as she clutched at the fabric, trying to shield herself from the stares, but the gown clung to her body, stained and ruined, exposing every tremor of her shame. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand respect. Instead, silence pressed down on her throat. For 20 years she had trained herself to endure, to stay quiet, to hold her dignity by burying her pain. But tonight that silence betrayed her. Serena wasn't finished. "Careful, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You'll melt in front of everyone. Though, I suppose it's about time he upgraded, isn't it?" She leaned closer to Adrian, pressing herself against him like a trophy. Adrian chuckled. Not loudly, but loud enough for Victoria to hear. That sound was worse than any insult. It was confirmation that the man she had built her life around had chosen not only to betray her in private, but to annihilate her in public. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She could taste the salt of them as one slid down her cheek. She thought of the years she had given him, the dreams she had buried for him, the children she had raised while he built his empire. She thought of the nights she had lain awake, telling herself that marriage was sacrifice, that love meant endurance. And now all of that, every sacrifice, every silent night, was mocked with a single cruel laugh. Around her, whispers sharpened into open comments. "Poor thing," someone muttered. "She should leave." Another voice snickered. "She's finished. He's replaced her." Every word sliced her thinner and thinner until she felt like she might simply vanish. Her knees buckled slightly. She grasped the edge of the table for balance, her knuckles white. For a moment she considered running, fleeing the ballroom, the mansion, the city itself. Let them have their empire. Let them have their power. Maybe her sons would forgive her for disappearing. But then she saw her reflection in the mirrored walls of the ballroom. The image was pitiful, a woman drenched, trembling, defeated. And yet, deep inside that reflection, she saw a flicker of something else. A spark. A reminder of who she once was before Adrian, before the empire, before the silence. That spark frightened her as much as it gave her strength, because if it grew, if she let it burn, it would change everything. Serena, mistaking her silence for surrender, lifted her glass of champagne. "To Adrian," she announced, her voice ringing out over the hushed crowd, "and to 20 years wasted." She clinked her glass against Adrian's. A few guests gasped, others laughed nervously. The cruelty was unrelenting. Victoria's hand trembled, clenched into a fist at her side. She could feel the burn of the coffee, but another fire had begun to spread through her veins. Rage. Her sons stepped closer, their presence a shield. Ethan's voice broke the silence. Not another word. His tone was calm, steady, but carried a warning that silenced even the boldest whispers. And then Daniel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on his father, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You chose humiliation, father. Now you'll face the consequences." The ballroom was frozen, every guest waiting for Adrian Hale to act. This was his moment to redeem himself, to step forward and defend the woman who had stood by his side for 2 decades. All eyes turned to him, expecting a gesture of compassion, a word of support, even the smallest flicker of humanity. But Adrian didn't move. Instead, he tightened his arm around Serena's waist, pulling her closer, as though staking his claim on her before the entire room. His smirk widened, and his eyes met Victoria's. Not with guilt, not with shame, but with cold amusement. It was the look of a man who believed he had already won. "Pathetic," Adrian muttered under his breath, but loud enough for Victoria and those nearby to hear. "Still clinging to dignity when you have none left." The words hit harder than the scalding coffee. Victoria flinched, her body recoiling as if struck. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wanted to scream, to remind him of the sacrifices, the years, the loyalty. But his expression told her it wouldn't matter. In Adrian's eyes, she was already erased. Serena tilted her head back and laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that filled the silence. She kissed Adrian's cheek, her eyes locked on Victoria, as if daring her to fight back. "He chose me," Serena said boldly. "Everyone can see it now. You're nothing more than a ghost of his past." Gasps rippled through the room. The audacity of her words was shocking even to guests accustomed to scandal. But Adrian didn't silence her. He didn't scold her. He nodded, letting her words stand as his truth. The betrayal was complete. For 20 years, Victoria had given this man her loyalty. She had raised his sons, stood by him through failure and triumph, endured his distance, his lies, his cruelty. And tonight, on the very night meant to celebrate their bond, he had thrown her aside like a broken trinket. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some pitied Victoria, others admired Serena's audacity, but most kept silent. Among the wealthy, silence was safer than morality. No one wanted to stand against Adrian Hale. No one, except his own blood. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightened, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You dare humiliate our mother like this?" His voice echoed across the room, slicing through the murmurs. Heads turned, guests leaned closer, eager for the next strike in this unfolding drama. Adrian turned slowly, his gaze falling on his sons. His smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by irritation. "Stay out of this," he snapped. "This is between your mother and me." But Ethan didn't back down. His voice grew stronger. "No, this is between right and wrong, and the whole world just saw where you stand." The crowd gasped again. For the first time, Adrian looked unsettled. His sons had never challenged him publicly before. He was a man used to absolute control, of his business, his image, his family. Tonight, that control slipped through his fingers. Serena scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. 2 spoiled boys playing heroes. Your father doesn't need you to defend him. He has me." She clutched Adrian's arm possessively, glaring at Ethan and Daniel. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting like ice. "Then let the world remember you stood beside her father while she burned." The tension thickened. Guests held their breath. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion. Adrian's lips parted, ready to unleash his fury. But before he could speak, Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out something that made Serena's smile falter and Adrian's face pale. A phone, already unlocked, displaying proof that would shatter everything. The phone in Ethan's hand gleamed beneath the chandelier light. It wasn't just a device, it was a weapon. The guests leaned forward, breath caught in their throats, sensed something monumental was about to unravel. Serena's laughter faltered, the edges of her smile twitching. Adrian's smirk froze, his eyes narrowing at his son. "What are you doing?" Adrian demanded, his voice low and dangerous, the kind he used in boardrooms when someone dared to cross him. Ethan didn't flinch. His hand was steady, his voice firm. "Showing the truth you thought you buried." He tapped the screen, and instantly, the ballroom filled with a sound more shocking than Serena's cruel laughter. Adrian's voice. A recording played over the phone's speakers, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She'll never leave me. She's too weak. Victoria will swallow anything I do, as long as she keeps the title of my wife. She's convenient, nothing more. Serena is my future." Gasps erupted across the room. The words echoed against the marble walls, slicing through the orchestra's uneasy silence. Victoria's face paled, tears brimming in her eyes. She had suspected his betrayal, but hearing the venom in his voice was like being stabbed twice, once by the betrayal, and once by its public exposure. Adrian lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone from Ethan's hand, but his son stepped back, calm and deliberate. "No, father," Ethan said sharply. "You've silenced her long enough. Tonight, you don't get to silence anyone." The recording continued, Serena's voice chiming in. "She's pathetic, still clinging to those old-fashioned vows. But once she's gone, once you divorce her, I'll be Mrs. Hale. Everyone will bow to me." The crowd erupted. Some gasped in shock, others whispered furiously, while a few pulled out their phones to record the unfolding disaster. What had begun as gossip was now undeniable proof. The mistress had spoken her ambition, and the billionaire had confirmed his cruelty. Serena's face twisted with rage. "You little brat," she hissed, her claws showing. "You think this proves anything? People will forget in a week, they always do." But Ethan wasn't done. He swiped again, pulling up photographs, grainy but clear enough. Adrian and Serena together, in hotel suites, on beaches, in intimate poses that left nothing to the imagination. Time-stamped, dated. Daniel stepped forward now, his voice sharp and merciless. "While you pretended to be a husband, you were parading her across the world, and while Mother held this family together, you tore it apart with your greed." Adrian's face turned red with fury. "How dare you?" "No, father," Ethan cut in. "How dare you?" His voice shook, not with fear but with emotion. "How dare you humiliate her after everything she's given? After every night she waited for you, after every sacrifice she made so you could stand here with your empire." The ballroom was silent again, but not with whispers this time, with judgment. Even Adrian's closest allies stared at him with disgust. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Board members exchanged looks that promised future consequences. Serena tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "This is just family drama, nothing more. The Hales will survive, they always do." But Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile. Not this time. He turned the phone one last time, displaying a message thread. Adrian's own words, boasting about manipulating contracts, coercing signatures, and hiding assets from his wife. The evidence wasn't just personal. It was legal. Victoria's knees nearly gave out. She had known her marriage was broken, but never the depth of his betrayal. And as the evidence spread from phone to phone, from whisper to whisper, the walls of Adrian Hale's empire began to tremble. Because what Ethan revealed wasn't just adultery, it was a scandal that could end in handcuffs. The ballroom still buzzed from Ethan's revelations. Guests whispered in disbelief, their eyes darting between Adrian and Serena like spectators at a boxing match. Adrian's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but before he could recover, his second son stepped forward. Daniel, the quieter of the two, had always been the observer, the one who noticed details others overlooked. Tonight, his silence broke, and when it did, his words cut sharper than any blade. "You think this is just about infidelity, father?" Daniel's voice rang across the room. "It isn't. This is about how you treated her. Not as a wife, not as a partner, but as a liability to be controlled." The crowd stilled again. Daniel reached into his suit jacket, pulling out a folder thick with papers. He laid them on a nearby table, flipping through them with deliberate precision. "For years, you've used contracts to strip Mother of her rights. You coerced her into signing documents she didn't understand, documents that transferred assets, properties, even her inheritance from her parents into your control." Victoria gasped. "Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. She hadn't known the extent of it. Adrian's face flushed crimson. "Stop this nonsense," he barked, his voice shaking with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Daniel didn't falter. He held up one paper for the room to see, his finger pointing to the signature at the bottom. "Here's one example. 5 years ago, you told Mother she was signing paperwork to streamline taxes. In reality, it was a transfer of ownership. Half of her charitable trust was placed under your control. Money she had dedicated to helping families in need, you siphoned into your own accounts." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Reporters scribbled faster. Serena shifted uneasily, sensing the tide turning. "And this one," Daniel continued, pulling out another document, "is even worse. 10 years ago, on the night of your 15th anniversary, you brought a stack of papers to her after dinner. You told her it was a routine update for the family estate plan. In truth, it was a clause giving you full authority to sell her childhood home without her approval. And you did. You sold it. The house she loved, the house where her parents lived until they died, you erased it for profit." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Memories of her parents, of summers in that house, of the garden her mother had planted, all gone because of one man's greed. "You're lying," Adrian thundered, his voice desperate now. "She signed willingly." "No," Daniel shot back, his tone icy. "She signed under deception. That's not consent, that's fraud." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Words like fraud, coercion, lawsuit rippled through the air. Investors who had once admired Adrian's cunning now looked at him with contempt. His empire was built on trust, and that trust was cracking before their eyes. Serena clutched Adrian's arm, hissing, "Say something, do something." But Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, he looked cornered. Daniel's voice softened as he turned to his mother. "You never questioned, because you trusted him. You believed he was protecting the family, but he wasn't. He was protecting himself." Victoria's legs trembled, her body weak, but her spirit stirred. For the first time in years, she looked directly at Adrian, not with longing, not with hope, but with fury. The silence stretched, heavy with judgment, until one of the board members finally spoke, his voice grim. "If what they're saying is true, Hale, you're not just facing scandal, you're facing prison." Adrian's mask shattered. His smirk was gone, replaced by a flash of fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could defend himself, the ballroom door swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, and the crowd gasped as they walked straight toward Serena. The heavy doors of the ballroom creaked open, and the sight of 2 uniformed officers in navy blue silenced every whisper. Their presence cut through the glitter and gold like a blade. For a heartbeat, the orchestra faltered again, the violins screeching to an awkward halt. All eyes swung from Adrian to Serena. The younger mistress straightened her back, tossing her dark hair over her shoulder, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Oh, please, what is this, some sort of theatrical stunt?" Her voice trembled only slightly, but her eyes darted nervously, betraying the panic bubbling beneath her polished exterior. The taller officer, a broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, stepped forward. His voice carried across the ballroom with authority. "Serena Cross, you are under investigation for public assault and intentional infliction of harm." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled across the room. Guests who moments earlier had laughed at Victoria's humiliation now recoiled, eager to distance themselves from the scandal unraveling before them. Phones lifted discreetly again, recording every second. Serena's painted lips curled into a smirk, but her confidence faltered. "You can't be serious. It was just coffee, a joke. Don't tell me we're arresting people for accidents now." But the second officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, stepped in. "We've already collected witness statements. Multiple guests confirm you deliberately poured scalding liquid on Mrs. Victoria Hale in front of this gathering. That constitutes intentional assault. And with this many witnesses, Miss Cross, there is no joke here." Serena's mask cracked. Her smile wavered. She turned to Adrian, clutching his arm in desperation. "Adrian, do something. Tell them it was nothing." But Adrian didn't move. For the first time all night, his eyes showed uncertainty. His empire was trembling under the weight of fraud, deception, and scandal. Helping Serena now would only drive the knife deeper. "Adrian," Serena hissed, louder this time. "Say something." Adrian pulled his arm back, slowly, deliberately, and in that moment, Serena realized she stood alone. The crowd shifted, hungry for retribution. A woman in emerald silk whispered, "Serves her right." A man near the orchestra muttered, "Arrest her. Let her rot." The same guests who had once courted Serena's attention now turned their backs. She was no longer entertainment, she was a liability. The female officer reached for her handcuffs. "Miss Cross, please place your hands behind your back." Serena's composure snapped. She staggered backward, knocking over a champagne glass, her voice shrill. "No, you can't do this to me. Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Ethan's voice cut through, calm and unyielding. "You're the woman who tried to destroy our mother. And now you're nothing." The officers took her arms firmly, pulling her wrists behind her back as the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the stunned ballroom. Serena's eyes darted wildly, searching for allies, but there were none. The cameras captured her panic, her once perfect image unraveling in real time. Victoria watched, trembling, torn between shock and relief. For the first time in years, justice was not a distant dream. It was unfolding before her eyes. Serena thrashed, screaming as the officers began to escort her out. "Adrian, you promised me everything. Don't let them take me." Adrian's face hardened. He said nothing. His silence was a betrayal sharper than any knife. And as Serena's voice faded into the distance, swallowed by the grand doors closing behind her, the crowd turned back to Adrian. The mistress was gone, but now the spotlight burned hotter than ever on the billionaire himself. The echo of Serena's screams still lingered in the air as the ballroom doors slammed shut behind the officers. Silence swept across the crowd. Not the silence of shock this time, but the silence of judgment. 100 pairs of eyes swiveled toward Adrian Hale. The man who once commanded respect with a single glance now looked suddenly smaller, his broad shoulders sagging under the weight of scandal. His smirk had vanished, replaced with a tight jaw and eyes that betrayed fear. For the first time in decades, Adrian Hale no longer seemed untouchable. Whispers rose again, sharper than before, this time directed squarely at him. "Did you hear those recordings?" one guest hissed. "He called his own wife weak," another whispered in disgust. "I invested millions in his company. If he lies to his family like this, what about us?" A third muttered, his tone edged with panic. Members of Hale Enterprises board seated near the front exchanged dark looks. One of them, a silver-haired man named Charles Whitmore, leaned toward another. "This isn't just personal scandal anymore. This is liability. If shareholders get wind of this, we're finished." Beside him, a woman in a navy gown nodded. "We need an emergency meeting. Tonight, before the market opens tomorrow." Adrian caught their whispers, his jaw clenched tighter. "You all think you can just replace me?" He snapped, his voice booming. "I built this empire. None of you would have a dime without me." But his outburst only fueled the fire. Guests recoiled, some shaking their heads. Investors who once flattered him now scribbled notes or typed furiously into their phones. Every movement, every whisper, every sideways glance was another crack forming in the empire he thought indestructible. Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady and cold. "Listen to yourself. You think power makes you invincible. But tonight, the world saw what you really are, a man who built his empire on lies, betrayal, and fraud." Ethan added, his eyes locked on his father. "You humiliated our mother, and now you've humiliated yourself. Every ally you thought you had will walk away before morning." Victoria stood silently, trembling, watching the walls of Adrian's kingdom collapse around him. For so long, she had dreamed of justice, but she had never dared imagine it would look like this. Her son standing tall, the crowd condemning him, the empire unraveling before her eyes. Adrian tried to regain control, raising his hands. "Enough, all of you, enough. These are just family disputes. You think a few angry words, a few fabricated documents will bring me down?" But Charles Whitmore rose from his seat, his voice firm. "This isn't just family business anymore, Hale. You've jeopardized this company's reputation, and by extension, every one of us. The board won't stand behind you, not after tonight." Gasps rippled. It was the first public fracture, an open declaration of revolt against their king. Adrian's face twisted with rage. "You think you can strip me of what I built? Try it. I'll drag every one of you down with me." But the crowd wasn't with him anymore. Even the orchestra sat frozen, instruments silent, as if unwilling to play for a fallen man. Reporters lifted their cameras. Flashbulbs burst like gunfire. Adrian Hale, the untouchable mogul, was now the story of the night, and not the kind he controlled. Victoria's heart pounded as she realized the tide had shifted. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't the one standing in the shadows. Adrian was. And then, from the back of the room, a new voice called out, firm and chilling. "Mr. Hale, the Securities Commission would also like to have a word with you." The word struck Adrian like a hammer blow. The Securities Commission. The name alone carried a weight heavier than any gossip, heavier even than the humiliation of his mistress being dragged away in handcuffs. This wasn't scandal anymore. This was law. A man in a dark, tailored suit stepped forward from the back of the room, his badge flashing briefly under the chandelier. His tone was calm, professional, but firm. "Mr. Hale, my office has received credible reports of financial irregularities tied directly to your real estate holdings. Tonight's revelations confirm several red flags. You will be required to answer questions immediately." The guests erupted into whispers again, this time tinged with awe and fear. It wasn't every day that a titan of industry was confronted in his own ballroom. Some raised their phones higher, recording with trembling hands, knowing this footage would go viral before sunrise. Adrian's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. This is a party, not a courtroom." He turned toward the crowd, his voice booming. "You all think you can stand there and judge me? You fed on my success for decades. You bought into my empire, reaped the rewards, and now, because of one bitter woman and two ungrateful sons, you want to tear me down?" But the more he shouted, the weaker he looked. The polished mask of control was gone, replaced by desperation. His voice cracked with fury, and his sweat glistened under the harsh light of cameras. The investigator didn't flinch. "Mr. Hale, our office will be requesting full access to your accounts, property records, and contract files. Failure to comply could result in charges of obstruction of justice. I suggest you prepare yourself." Daniel's eyes blazed as he stepped closer to his father. "You hear that? You're not just losing your reputation. You're losing everything. You can't bully or bribe your way out of this." Adrian spun toward him, his finger trembling with rage. You think you're better than me? You're nothing without my name." But Ethan stepped in, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "We don't want your name anymore. Tonight, the Hale legacy doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the truth." The crowd gasped at the boldness of the declaration. It wasn't just defiance, it was a declaration of war from son to father. Victoria's knees trembled as she stood at the edge of the storm. For 20 years she had endured his cruelty in silence, believing justice would never come. And now, before her very eyes, the walls of Adrian's empire were collapsing, not just socially but legally. Her heart ached with a mix of grief and relief. She was watching the man she once loved transform fully into the monster she feared he had become. Adrian tried to rally. He raised his arms, his voice booming, desperate. "I am Adrian Hale. I built towers that touched the sky. I made fortunes for every man in this room. You think you can erase me?" But the murmurs told a different story. Guests shook their heads. Investors whispered about withdrawing. Board members typed furiously, already planning his removal. The investigator stepped closer, his voice steady as stone. "Mr. Hale, you may be powerful, but you are not above the law." And then, as if on cue, the grand doors opened once more. This time, it wasn't Serena being dragged away. It was a team of federal agents, and they were here for Adrian Hale. The ballroom doors groaned open once more, but this time the footsteps were heavier, sharper, echoing like the toll of a bell. 4 federal agents strode into the room, dressed in dark suits, badges flashing under the crystal light. The crowd parted instinctively, murmurs rippling like waves. Guests who had once fought to be close to Adrian now stepped back, eager to avoid being tainted by his downfall. Adrian's face drained of color. His smirk was gone, his voice caught in his throat. For a man who had conquered boardrooms and bent politicians to his will, the sight of federal agents approaching him was a nightmare he had never prepared for. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp eyes, stopped just a few feet away. Her voice was clear, steady, and absolute. "Mr. Adrian Hale, we are executing a federal warrant related to charges of securities fraud, tax evasion, and willful concealment of marital assets. You are required to cooperate with us immediately." The words struck like thunder. The guests gasped in unison, hands flying to mouths, phones rising higher. Some whispered furiously, others simply stared, wide-eyed, as the untouchable billionaire stood on the brink of collapse. Adrian's hands trembled before he clenched them into fists. "You can't do this here," he hissed, his voice low but cracking. "This is my home, my celebration." The agent's eyes never wavered. "Your home is not above the law, sir, and neither are you." For a moment, Adrian tried to regain control. He straightened his back, forced his voice louder. "Listen to me. This is a mistake. These are lies planted by my enemies. By her." He pointed a shaking finger at Victoria, his eyes blazing with fury. "This is all her doing. She poisoned my sons, turned them against me, and now she's dragging you all down with her lies." But the crowd no longer believed him. The recordings, the documents, the mistress's arrest, they were too much to ignore. His words sounded like desperation, not power. Victoria's chest ached, but she didn't flinch. For the first time, she let his accusations wash over her without fear. His power to wound her had broken the moment Serena's laughter echoed and her son stepped forward. Now his rage was only proof of his crumbling empire. Ethan spoke firmly, his voice carrying across the room. "You did this to yourself, father. Not mother, not us. You." Daniel stepped closer, his glare piercing. "And tonight, everyone sees you for what you are." The murmurs grew louder, like a chorus of condemnation. Board members exchanged nods, some already drafting statements in their minds. Investors whispered about divestments. Guests who had once begged for Adrian's attention now looked at him with disgust. Adrian's breath quickened. He looked around the room, searching for one ally, one sympathetic face, but there were none. Even Serena, his bold mistress, was gone, dragged away in cuffs. He was alone, standing in the ruins of his pride. The lead agent signaled her team. 2 agents stepped forward, reaching into their jackets. The unmistakable glint of handcuffs flashed in the chandelier light. The crowd gasped again. Some raised their phones higher, desperate to capture the billionaire's fall. Adrian backed up a step, shaking his head. "No, you won't take me. Not here. Not in front of them." But the agents kept advancing, and just as the nearest one reached for his wrist, Adrian spun, knocking over a champagne tower, crystal crashing to the marble floor. The once mighty billionaire was trying to flee his own ballroom. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Champagne cascaded across the marble floor, pooling at Adrian Hale's feet as crystal shards glittered like fallen stars. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the billionaire, once a man of control and composure, lunged away from the agents with wild desperation. "Stop him!" someone shouted, though no one moved. Guests clutched their pearls, their clutches, their phones, paralyzed by the sight of power unraveling into chaos. Some even scrambled backward, unwilling to get in the path of a man who suddenly looked more like a cornered animal than a titan of industry. Adrian shoved past a waiter, sending a tray of hors d'oeuvres flying. The young man stumbled, narrowly avoiding the broken glass. Cameras flashed frantically, recording every humiliating second. What had started as whispers of scandal was now a full-blown public spectacle. The federal agents gave chase, their footsteps pounding against the marble. "Mr. Hale, stop where you are," the lead agent commanded, her voice slicing through the noise. But Adrian didn't listen. His chest heaved, his breath ragged, his eyes darting like a man hunted. He barreled through the crowd, knocking over chairs, ignoring the horrified gasps of his peers. For years he had strutted through rooms like this, untouchable, adored, feared. Tonight, those same rooms became a cage he was desperate to escape. Victoria stood frozen near the center of the ballroom, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of a table. She had seen Adrian in many forms, ambitious, charming, cruel, but never like this, never reduced to panic, scrambling for a way out like a thief caught in the act. For the first time, she didn't feel fear of him. She felt pity, and beneath that pity, a rising wave of vindication. Ethan and Daniel moved instinctively, stepping between their mother and the chaos. Their father might have chosen humiliation, but they would not let his downfall drag her further into danger. Adrian lunged toward the grand staircase, his polished shoes slipping on champagne. He caught himself on the banister, his face twisted in rage and desperation. "You won't take me," he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The lead agent signaled her team. Two agents broke off, circling the far side of the staircase, cutting off his path. The crowd shifted nervously, torn between morbid fascination and genuine fear that violence might erupt. A woman in emerald silk whispered, "This is the end of him." Another man muttered, "He'll never come back from this." Their words floated like daggers through the air, each one piercing what remained of Adrian's pride. He grabbed a champagne bottle from a nearby table, brandishing it like a weapon. The crowd gasped again. His hands trembled, the bottle shaking as he swung it back. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. The agents didn't flinch. Their training showed in every measured step, every calm command. "Put it down, Mr. Hale. Don't make this worse for yourself." But Adrian's pride was louder than reason. "I am Adrian Hale. No one puts me in chains." His eyes blazed, darting to the exits, desperate for any escape. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The billionaire, once untouchable, now cornered and frantic, the crowd holding its breath, the agents ready to strike. And then, above the chaos, a calm voice rose, Victoria's. "Adrian, run all you want, but you can't escape the truth anymore." Adrian's chest heaved as he stood at the top of the grand staircase, his grip white-knuckled around the champagne bottle. His once pristine suit was soaked in spilled liquor, his hair disheveled, his face twisted with desperation. For years, Adrian Hale had been the image of control, the embodiment of power. But now, before the eyes of his peers, his empire, and his own family, he looked like a man stripped bare, cornered, hunted, and utterly undone. The federal agents moved with precision, two circling behind him, two advancing steadily up the steps. Their voices were firm but even, practiced in moments like this. "Put the bottle down, Mr. Hale. There's nowhere left to run." Adrian's eyes darted wildly, scanning the exits, the balconies, even the chandeliers, as though some miracle escape would present itself. But there was none. The ballroom had become a prison, and every guest was a witness to his downfall. From below, Victoria stood frozen, watching. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with an odd calm. This was the man who had once held her hand in a tiny apartment and promised her forever. This was the man who had built towers that touched the sky. And this was the man who had poured all of that power into betraying her, crushing her spirit, humiliating her in front of the world. Now he stood on the edge of ruin, and she was no longer his victim. She was his witness. "Adrian," she called softly, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Put it down. Stop this before it's too late." Her words struck him harder than the agent's commands. He froze, his eyes locking on hers. For a flicker of a moment, the man she had once loved appeared. The young dreamer, the fighter she had believed in. His lips trembled, his jaw tightened. But then the rage returned, fueled by pride too swollen to yield. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore," he spat. His voice was venom, but the tremor in it betrayed him. The agents stepped closer, their movements slow, deliberate. One reached for the handcuffs, the metallic click echoing ominously through the room. The guests watched in silence, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide. Some had their phones lifted, recording the moment history was made, the fall of a king. Ethan and Daniel stepped forward protectively, standing in front of their mother. They weren't boys anymore. They were men, and tonight they stood as her shield. Ethan's voice carried steady authority. "It's over, Father. Don't make this worse than it already is." Adrian's face contorted, his pride bleeding into desperation. "You ungrateful sons," he snarled. "Everything you are, everything you have, is because of me." Daniel's reply was swift, sharp. "And everything we are tonight is despite you." The crowd gasped. The truth rang louder than Adrian's rage. The lead agent raised a hand. "Last chance, Mr. Hale. Put down the bottle and come quietly, or we will take you by force." Adrian's grip tightened. Sweat dripped down his temple. For a long, tense moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a roar of defiance, Adrian hurled the champagne bottle against the marble wall, where it shattered in a spray of glass and foam. The agents surged forward, tackling him to the ground as the crowd screamed. Cameras flashed, capturing the mighty mogul sprawled on the floor, his face pressed into the marble, his hands wrenched behind his back. Victoria's knees weakened as she watched the cuffs snap around his wrists. For 2 decades she had feared his power. Tonight she saw it broken. But just as relief threatened to wash over her, the lead agent looked up, her expression grave. "Mrs. Hale, we'll need your cooperation too. You may not realize it, but some of his crimes involve your name." The ballroom was still echoing with gasps as Adrian Hale lay cuffed on the marble floor, his empire reduced to dust in the eyes of everyone who mattered. But before the weight of his downfall could settle, the lead federal agent turned to Victoria. Her sharp gaze softened slightly, but her words carried the same authority that had just toppled a billionaire. "Mrs. Hale," she said, voice steady, "we'll need your cooperation. Some of the fraudulent documents we've been reviewing carry your signature. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, you may be connected to your husband's crimes." The room, already tense, stiffened further. Head swiveled toward Victoria, eyes widening. Whispers started again, first cautious, then bolder. "Did she know?" one guest hissed. "Maybe she was part of it," another speculated. "She signed the papers. That makes her guilty too, doesn't it?" Victoria's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. The humiliation of the coffee, the betrayal, the recordings, all of it had pushed her to the edge. And now this? To be painted not as the victim, but as an accomplice? I didn't know," she stammered, her voice breaking. "He told me those papers were for estate planning, for taxes. I trusted him." The agent's expression remained unreadable. "We'll need you to provide full testimony, Mrs. Hale. If you were coerced, it will come to light. But we need the truth." Tears burned her eyes as she clutched the table beside her. For years she had endured in silence, trusting Adrian's word, believing her sacrifices were for family. And now that trust was being twisted into a chain that threatened to drag her down with him. Ethan stepped forward, his voice sharp with protectiveness. "She had nothing to do with this. He manipulated her, forced her to sign things without explaining. She's the victim here, not the criminal." Daniel added, his eyes locked on the agents. "We can prove it. We've already started gathering evidence. Emails, messages, even witnesses from his office. Our mother didn't commit fraud. She was deceived." The crowd murmured again, this time divided. Some nodded, pity returning to their eyes. Others shook their heads, skeptical. In the world of the wealthy, innocence was often drowned beneath scandal. Victoria's knees trembled, but she forced herself to straighten. She met the agent's eyes, her voice steadier than she thought possible. "I will cooperate fully. Whatever you need, I'll give you. But understand this, I am not the criminal here. I am the woman he betrayed, used, and humiliated for 20 years. If my name is on those papers, it's because he stole my trust, not because I shared his crimes." Her words rang with conviction, silencing some of the whispers. Even the agent's expression softened slightly. "That will be determined by the investigation, but your cooperation is noted." Victoria exhaled shakily, her body trembling with both fear and relief. For once, she had spoken not as the quiet wife in the shadows, but as a woman reclaiming her voice, but the relief was short-lived. From the floor, Adrian lifted his head, his face twisted with rage. "Don't believe her lies. She knew. She was there every step of the way. She's as guilty as I am." The agents pressed him down, but the damage was done. Gasps spread again. Doubt returned like a storm cloud. And just as Victoria felt the weight of suspicion crushing her, the ballroom doors opened yet again. This time, it wasn't agents. It was her closest friend and trusted lawyer, Linda, carrying a folder thick with evidence that could either save or destroy her. The ballroom doors swung open, and all eyes turned to see a tall woman stride confidently into the chaos. Linda Hayes, Victoria's oldest friend and trusted lawyer, carried herself with the authority of someone who belonged in courtrooms, not ballrooms. Her tailored black suit contrasted sharply with the glittering gowns around her, but in that moment, she was the most powerful presence in the room. "Finally," Victoria whispered, her voice cracking with relief. Linda walked straight to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder before facing the agents. "I represent Mrs. Victoria Hale, and I believe you'll want to see this." She set a thick folder onto the table, snapping it open. Inside were neatly organized documents, emails, and sworn statements. The room, still thick with tension, leaned in as if drawn by gravity. The lead agent raised a brow. "And what exactly are we looking at, Miss Hayes?" "Proof," Linda replied firmly, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "Proof that Victoria Hale had no knowledge of her husband's fraudulent activities. Proof that she was misled, coerced, and deceived at every turn." She pulled out the first document. "Here's an email from Adrian to his financial advisor. He explicitly instructs them to prepare documents that transfer assets from Victoria's charitable foundation into his private accounts, without her knowledge. He even writes, and I quote, "She'll sign anything if I hand it to her during dinner." Gasps spread like wildfire. The quote was damning, the proof undeniable. Even the agents exchanged glances. Linda continued, flipping through more evidence. Here are witness statements from household staff who saw Adrian bring stacks of papers to Victoria late at night, often after she'd taken medication for migraines. He waited until she was vulnerable, then pressured her to sign without explanation. Victoria covered her mouth with trembling hands, the truth cutting deeper than she expected. She had always suspected deception, but seeing it laid out so plainly made her knees weak. "And this," Linda said, holding up another paper, "is a forensic analysis of Adrian's financial transfers. Funds moved from accounts with Victoria's forged initials to offshore holdings tied to Serena Cross. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, layered with fraud." The ballroom erupted again. Reporters typed furiously, their headlines practically writing themselves. Board members whispered grimly, some shaking their heads, others muttering about damage control. Adrian, still pinned to the floor by agents, thrashed against their grip. "Lies, all lies, she's making this up to protect her." His voice cracked with desperation, the arrogance stripped away. But Linda didn't even look at him. She turned back to the lead agent, her voice calm but resolute. "My client is not guilty of fraud. She is guilty of one thing only, trusting a man who weaponized her loyalty. And now she's ready to testify fully against him." The lead agent nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the documents. "This will need verification, but if what you've presented holds up, it drastically changes the picture." For the first time that night, Victoria felt the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't complicit. She was free, if the evidence was strong enough to stand. The crowd murmured, some voices soft with sympathy now. She really didn't know. He used her. The tide was turning again, inch by inch, away from suspicion and toward justice. But then, Linda pulled out one last paper, her face tightening as she scanned it. She hesitated, her hand trembling just slightly. Victoria's breath caught. "Linda, what is it?" Linda looked up, her eyes grim. "This document proves your innocence, but it also reveals a secret Adrian never wanted you to know. And it changes everything." The room was already tense, but Linda's hesitation made the silence unbearable. Guests leaned forward, holding their breath. Even the federal agents paused, their focus momentarily shifting from Adrian to the lawyer who held the fate of the evening in her hands. Victoria's voice cracked. "Linda, what is it? Please, tell me." Linda exhaled slowly, then raised the final document high enough for everyone to see. "This," she said, her tone steady but grave, "is a notarized will. Not just any will. It is the last will and testament of Adrian Hale's late father." Confusion rippled across the crowd. Why would Adrian's father's will matter tonight, in the middle of financial fraud and public humiliation? Linda pressed on, her words deliberate. "The will states that half of the Hale fortune, half of everything Adrian built upon, was never his to control. It was placed in trust for Victoria Hale and her sons." Gasps erupted. Heads swiveled back toward Adrian, still pinned to the marble floor. His face turned a sickly shade of red. Linda's voice rose, stronger now. But instead of honoring that will, Adrian concealed it. He falsified documents, erased records, and claimed sole control over the empire. For 20 years, Victoria, you believed you were living off his generosity. In truth, he was living off yours. By law, you and your children were the rightful heirs all along. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests shouted in disbelief, some clutching at pearls and others shaking their heads in shock. Board members muttered furiously, realizing Adrian had not only betrayed his family, but defrauded them by hiding the true structure of the company. Victoria staggered back, her hand covering her mouth. All these years, her tears flowed freely, but this time they were not only of pain, they were of anger, of vindication, of clarity. She had given up everything for him, never realizing that the power had always been hers. Adrian roared, his voice raw and broken. "Lies, all lies, that will was invalid, my father left it to me." He thrashed against the agents, his voice rising into a desperate scream. "She doesn't deserve it, none of them do." But Linda's calm words cut through his fury like a blade. "The courts disagree. This will is notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. The only reason it was hidden is because you buried it. Tonight it resurfaces, and with it, everything you tried to steal from her." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "So all this time, the empire wasn't built solely by you. Half of it always belonged to Mom," Ethan added, his gaze cold as steel. "And you spent 20 years trying to erase that truth, but you can't erase it anymore." The federal agents exchanged a nod, their case against Adrian growing stronger with every word. Fraud, coercion, tax evasion, and now concealment of a will. The billionaire's downfall was complete. Victoria's chest rose and fell rapidly. She felt the weight of the revelation crashing down upon her. She had never sought power, never desired wealth beyond what was necessary for her family. Yet here it was. The truth that she was not the powerless wife in the shadows. She was the rightful matriarch of the Hale legacy. The crowd's murmurs shifted into something else now. Admiration, respect, sympathy. The tide had turned completely, and then Linda's voice lowered almost reluctantly. "But there's one more detail, Victoria, one I didn't want to share like this, but you deserve to know." Victoria's knees weakened. "What is it?" Linda's eyes softened with sorrow. "Adrian didn't just steal from you. He hid another secret, one that involves your sons." The ballroom was so silent that the faint hum of the chandeliers could be heard. Victoria's breath caught as Linda's words echoed in her ears. A secret involving her sons? Her heart pounded violently, dread and curiosity intertwining into a knot in her chest. Linda unfolded a smaller envelope from the back of the folder, her hand trembling only slightly. "This," she said, her voice low but steady, "is a paternity disclosure filed by Adrian's father's attorneys shortly before his death. It confirms that the trust and inheritance were never meant to pass directly to Adrian, because his father feared Adrian would squander it. Instead, it was to be secured for the next generation, Ethan and Daniel." Gasps erupted across the crowd. The words rippled like thunder through the ballroom. Adrian's face contorted with pure rage, his voice breaking into a guttural scream. "No, they're mine. Everything I built is mine. Those boys wouldn't exist without me." But Linda pressed on, her voice unwavering. "No, Adrian. Legally, the trust recognized that your sons would be the rightful heirs to the fortune and the legacy. You were never the sole owner. You were a custodian. And you violated that trust the moment you tried to seize it for yourself." Victoria's legs nearly gave way. Ethan caught her arm, steadying her, while Daniel's hand gripped hers. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness but from the overwhelming realization. Her sons, the very reason she had endured so much pain, were not powerless bystanders in Adrian's empire. They were its true inheritors. The crowd murmured in awe. Some whispered with admiration, others with disbelief. So it always belonged to the family, not just him. The sons will carry the Hale name forward, not Adrian. Adrian thrashed against the agents holding him down, his voice a ragged roar. "You can't take it from me. I am Adrian Hale. I am the Empire." But his words rang hollow. His empire had already crumbled. The agents tightened their hold, their cuffs gleaming under the chandelier's light. Ethan spoke first, his voice calm, carrying the weight of justice. "No, father, you were never the empire. You were the parasite feeding off it." Daniel's voice followed, sharp and resolute. "And tonight, that ends. The Hale legacy belongs to Mom and to us, not you." The ballroom erupted into applause, hesitant at first, then swelling into thunderous approval. Guests stood, clapping not just for the sons but for the woman at the center of it all. For 20 years, Victoria had been silent, invisible, overshadowed by her husband's arrogance. Tonight, she stood tall, no longer as a victim, but as the rightful matriarch of the Hale name. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her sons. "We don't need revenge," she whispered. "We just need to rebuild, with truth, with love, and with honor." The lead agent gave a sharp nod. "Take him away." Adrian's screams echoed down the marble halls as he was dragged out of the ballroom, the sound of a fallen king being erased from his own castle. Serena had been taken first, now Adrian followed, leaving only Victoria, her sons, and a legacy cleansed by truth. Victoria exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing after 2 decades of tension. She looked around the ballroom, at the eyes now filled not with pity but with respect. She lifted her chin, her voice clear and resolute. "For years I was silent. For years I endured. But tonight proves one thing. No woman is too weak to rise again. No betrayal can bury the truth forever. Ethan and Daniel stood proudly at her side, her hands in theirs. The applause swelled until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate with vindication. Victoria Hale had lost everything, and in doing so she gained more than she ever dreamed. Freedom, justice, and the future her sons deserved. So that's how the story ends, my dear friends. You're still here with me, right? If you stayed until this moment, it must mean something inside this story touched your heart. Maybe it reminded you of your own silent battles, or the times you carried pain no one else could see. And if that's true, then please know, you're not alone. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "Circumstances don't make the man, they only reveal him to himself." Victoria's journey reminds us that betrayal and loss, no matter how painful, can strip away illusions and reveal the strength we never knew we had. And Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." What crushed her spirit in the beginning became the very path to her freedom. So if you're hurting right now, let this story be your reminder. Dignity, truth, and healing are always possible. If this touched you, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs it. And if you'd like to keep walking with us through stories that heal and inspire, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We're building something beautiful here. Together.